Hello again, friends. I am Steve Taylor, one of the illustrious crew at fthatnoisepod.com. I'm continuing my series, Steve Attempts to Read, and we'll cover chapters 6 and 7 from my book, The Lockbox, in this current video. This and the previous videos are now streaming on both YouTube and at our website, fthatnoisepod.com. There is also a link at my personal website, staylorbooks.com. As always, this video and all other content will be brought to you by Trashman Media. Trashman Media for the latest home video reviews of films you may not see in your local Redbox. Visit them at trashmanmedia.com. Also brought to you by Bizarre Abyss, the site dedicated to news and straight talk. Visit them at bizarreabyss.com. And don't forget to check out the #1 podcast among people reading to you right this moment. F That Noise. Check us out every Monday night at fthatnoisepod.com. And parents, the podcast is not for young ears. It's raunchy and fantastic. So now, if you like what you hear in all the readings that are going on with the Lockbox, and I'm going to be also reading my second book, Homecoming, as soon as I'm done with these, please go to Amazon.com. Or you can go to my website, and there are links to the Amazon pages for both the hardcover and the digital copies of both books. So please check it out. And when you go to my YouTube channel, also if you could hit subscribe on my channel, I am going to have a bunch of videos going up for all these readings, and I think they'll be very entertaining. Now, as you can tell by the way I'm flubbing, I like to do these videos in one take. I am not a professional reader. I like to flub anything I read and anything I say. If I do make a mistake, please bear with me. I find these enjoyable. I think the story is good. I am a little biased, but I am very proud of what I've written. So if you do hear a flub, just pretend that nothing happened. So without further ado, we're going to chapter 6 of the Lockbox. I'll drink water. It was another glorious summer day in Shoshone Peak. Sheriff Ethan Cole was heading into the office a little later than usual. Normally a punctual man, the sheriff was still a little hungover after the wild bachelor party he attended the previous night for Deputy Bob. His 1996 Eddie Bauer edition Ford Bronco slowly puttered down Main Street. This truck was his baby. It was jet black and in mint condition, with the exception of the small dent left in the driver's side door by his ex-wife. The woman couldn't cook to save her life, but she sure could swing a baseball bat at a moving car with deadly precision. Shoshone Peak had been his home for the last 15 years, and at 46 he had no plans of ever leaving. The first decade of his law enforcement career had taken place on the violent streets of Oakland, California. Following that hell, this peaceful setting suited him just fine. The morning commute was as nice as any he could remember. The friendly people of the community traveled from shop to shop, smiling and waving to each other. The local PTA had set up a bake sale in the church parking lot, hoping to raise enough funds to send the senior class to Washington, D.C. next year. Yes, sir, life was good. Breaking the peaceful silence, his radio that hung from the dashboard suddenly crackled to life. Sheriff Cole, come in, Sheriff. Reaching for the receiver, the sheriff sighed as he took one last pause to look at the beautiful skyline. This is Sheriff Cole. What's going on, Reggie? Trying to shake off the Jack Daniels you were feeding me last night, sir. My head feels like hell right now. I know what you mean, he said as he adjusted his sunglasses. I'm getting too old for that kind of party. You could have fooled us, Sheriff. We didn't know you could pole dance. Shaking his head, Sheriff Cole just laughed. If anyone finds out about that, I'll lock up the lot of you and deputize those dancers. There was some laughter from the other end, followed by the sound of a pill bottle being shaken. So what's with the call, Reg? We could have reminisced when I got to the station. There was a call just now from Mr. Burdick over on West. He said there were a couple of terrorists firing cannons in his backyard. And you believe that, old nutter? Not really, except that we received a few other calls about someone firing off fireworks near there. It might just be a coincidence, but it all sounds kind of fishy to me. Thought you might want to stop over on your way and check it out. Sheriff Cole checked his watch. It's just past noon. Have any of the others checked in yet? Just Bob so far, sir. I sent him out on a call on Liberty Drive. Jay Connolly was passing through the neighborhood when he saw two men fighting in Roger Lana's front yard. It sounds like some sort of domestic disturbance had broken out. Keep me informed on the situation. I'll try to check in as soon as I figure out what's spooking Mr. Burdick. Roger that, Sheriff. The line went dead. Now alone once again and with his thoughts, Sheriff Cole turned down Elm Street and into the fray. Break. Deputy Bob Galindo inched down Liberty Drive, his head throbbing with a dull ache brought on from dancing and multiple liters of cheap bourbon. Last night the boys threw him one hell of a bachelor party and he still felt a little drunk. Lucky for him, Sheriff Cole should be a lot worse off after his little pole dance with the girls, and probably wouldn't notice. Scanning the block as he crept closer to his destination, Bob searched for any sign of a problem. But the street seemed eerily deserted. It was a beautiful 80-degree day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. But not a single child was playing. Nobody was out in the sun washing their cars. It looked like one of the episodes of The Twilight Zone. Something was wrong. But what? As Bob approached Coach Lana's house, he began to get concerned. Roger had been a close friend for the last 5 years. After he had coached Bob his senior year at Jefferson, he had helped Bob get into college and eventually pull some strings to get him his job with the sheriff's department. Hell, he even introduced Bob to his fiancée, Jen. This man and his family were good people, and Bob would do anything for them. As he pulled up to their home, Bob became suspicious when he saw 2 large SUVs parked out front. He also noticed Roger's truck now sitting in the lawn, the driver's side door wide open. Puzzled by this, Bob pulled behind the trucks and fired up his sirens. To his dismay, 3 large armed men exited the home, followed by a well-dressed tan gentleman. The smaller figure walked slowly over to the vehicle with his arms up, hoping not to spook the young officer. Bob opened his door and drew his weapon as he exited the vehicle. "Now that's close enough, mister. Who are you and where are the Lanas?" The stranger stopped a few feet from the deputy. "I am truly sorry for this confusion, officer. I am Special Agent Johnson of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. I've come here in search of a very dangerous fugitive. The Lanas were assisting me and my colleagues in capturing this fiend." "Let me see some identification." Agent Johnson reached into his coat pocket. "Hey!" Deputy Bob shouted with concern. "Not so damn fast. Take your hand out of your jacket slowly." Agent Johnson obliged, removing his hand from his jacket in a very gentle motion. He opened his badge, passing the ID to the deputy. Bob quickly reviewed the document, his weapon remaining aimed at Agent Johnson's chest. "You see, officer, we're the good guys." The deputy closed the badge and lowered his sidearm as he passed it back to Agent Johnson. As he accepted the ID into his right hand, Agent Johnson swiftly removed his own weapon with his left and placed a round squarely between Deputy Bob's eyes, dropping him where he stood. That was too easy. Agent Johnson holstered his sidearm as he approached the car. Admiring his handiwork, he gave Bob's corpse a little kick. "I could have probably tricked this hayseed with a plastic star and some crayons. God, I love Americans." Spitting on the deputy's face, Agent Johnson turned to his men. "Gentlemen, can you please escort the deputy's body inside with the others? It is time to leave." Agent Johnson focused his attention back to where Holger was fidgeting with the detonator. "Are all of the preparations for our departure set?" "Yes, sir," Holger grunted. "I make sure myself." "Excellent. Well, let the party begin." Agent Johnson walked back to the SUV and waited for Holger to open his door. Begrudgingly, the large German handed his boss the detonator and opened the door for him. After shutting the door to the vehicle, Holger turned towards the house and whistled to his fellow agents. The men exited the house and they all loaded into the 2 trucks. As they sped away from the house, Holger could hear Agent Johnson counting from the rear. 3, 2, 1. Boom. Just as he finished his count, there was a deafening explosion and the Lana home was engulfed in a ball of flame. Like dominoes, the neighboring homes all disintegrated into a wall of fire and debris. The quiet neighborhood was no more. What remained was a fiery hell of which nothing and no one could have survived. Break. Sheriff Cole was just a few blocks away from the origin of the disturbance call when his truck began to shake violently. Checking his rearview mirror, he was shocked and terrified to see what grew off in the distance. A massive cloud of glowing smoke and fire climbed into the midday sky, enveloping the sun in a chokehold of darkness. Caught in a sudden rush of horror and total disbelief over what he was witnessing, the sheriff forced himself to turn his attention back to the road. As he refocused on his driving, a blur caught his eye just in time to slam on his brakes. The mighty Bronco skidded to a halt, only inches from the 2 individuals who had just stumbled into the road. Before he could get out of the truck and find what the hell was going on, his passenger door flew open and the 2 figures jumped inside. Caught off guard by the sudden move, Sheriff Cole reached for his gun. As he was about to draw, he recognized Samuel Lana and his sister Emily. They were trembling uncontrollably as they cowered on the passenger seat of the truck. Samuel, Lana, what in the hell do you think you're playing at? Sam looked at the sheriff, a fresh coating of blood across his cheek. Drive! Now! They're right behind us! Now you just wait one damn minute. Who's right behind you? What the hell has happened to you? Before Sam could respond, a flurry of bullets riddled the idling Bronco. Jesus, Sage, Christ almighty! Hold on, you two! Sheriff Cole popped his truck into gear and hammered down on the gas pedal with all his might. The large vehicle lurched forward and quickly gained momentum. As they fled from the attackers, more rounds punctured the rear of the vehicle, breaking out windows and shredding the rear seat. Sheriff Cole crossed over to the next block and turned north back into town. When he was sure they had lost the gunman, the sheriff grabbed the radio and immediately screamed into the mouthpiece. Reggie! The line remained silent. For Christ's sake, Reggie, pick up the friggin' radio! As if on cue, the radio sparked to life. Sheriff Cole! I repeat, come in, Sheriff Cole, this is an emergency. You're goddamn right it is. I was just fired upon by unknown assailants. I don't know who the heck they are, but they are gunning for the Lana kids. I have them right here with me, and it looks like they've been through a war. Over. Sir, there has been a massive explosion over on Liberty. It looks like the whole street has been destroyed. Destroyed? How the hell did this happen? I'm not sure. It's still hard to comprehend. Is there anyone who can get over there? What's going on? Wait. Isn't that where you sent Bob off to? Yes, sir, but I haven't been able to reach him since the explosion. Jen's here scared to death, and I don't know what to tell her. As far as the rest of the deputies, I haven't been able to get a hold of any of them either. Something big is going on, Sheriff, and I'm scared shitless. Just calm down, Reggie. I need you to relax and do your damn job. Start by finding the others, and then try to figure out what the hell happened on Liberty. We'll be there soon. Sorry, Sheriff. I'll keep it together. Wait. I think someone just pulled up. I'll get back to you. Emily realized what she just heard and turned to her brother terrified. Liberty. Sam, that's our street. Sheriff Cole looked over to his two passengers. Will one of you tell me what the hell is going on? Having finally scanned the terrified children, Sheriff Cole was surprised to see the extent of their injuries. Sam favored his left shoulder. A piece of his right ear was missing, causing the large amount of blood now covering his face. Emily was just covered in blood and dirt, but it didn't seem like the blood was from her wounds. It was probably just rubbed off from her brother. Sam looked down at his grieving sister. We don't know, Sheriff. Everything just began to melt down around us. I think those men killed our parents. Just saying the words caused him to choke up. He hadn't yet had time to accept what took place. Well, we need to get to the bottom of this, Sheriff Cole keyed up his radio once again. Reggie, you still there? The other line was silent. Frustrated by the lack of response, Sheriff Cole began to shout into the mouthpiece, but was cut off. I'm here, Ethan. What's your location? Sheriff Cole paused when he heard the greeting. Reggie never called him Ethan over the radio. He was always respectful of the badge. Something wasn't right. I'm heading to the station now. Have you been able to reach Deputy Galindo yet? No, sir. Still hasn't checked in yet. I had my girlfriend Jen put a call out to his wife. But Barb hasn't seen him either. What's your ETA? Just as the sheriff feared, it seemed that Reggie and perhaps the whole station had been compromised. The kid wasn't the sharpest tack in the box, but he certainly knew how to communicate under pressure after watching all those blasted Law and Order shows. Sit tight, Reg. I'll be there in a minute. I just have to make a stop first. Good luck, boss, was the last thing Reggie said before the line went dead. Sheriff Cole immediately turned west and stepped on the gas, distancing them from the town. Sam looked up at the sheriff. He was confused with their change of direction. Where are we going, Sheriff? Sheriff Cole just looked straight ahead. His face was now a mix of sadness and rage. A stream of tears rolled down his cheeks. Growing irate from the lack of a response, Sam raised his voice. Why aren't we heading back to the station? I don't get it. Somber, the sheriff just kept looking forward. There isn't a station to go back to. Whoever is causing all this mess is taking control. Sam sat back in stunned silence. He now understood the impact of the conversation between the sheriff and his deputy. I'm so sorry, Sheriff. The truck motored on down the road until it reached the highway, and from there they turned south onto Route 191. Sheriff Cole wiped his eyes from under his sunglasses. We need to get you to a hospital. I have a doctor friend in Rock Springs who can help patch you up. Just stay down and keep still till we get there. The Bronco picked up speed as they roared down the highway. The rest of the ride remained silent, save for the sobs of grief over the memory of those lost to the day's senseless destruction. Break. For those of you who don't know, I do have breaks through the chapter where it goes to a different scene. So if you ever hear me say break, it just means we're moving in the same chapter to a different part. Okay. Reggie's corpse was thrown on top of a pile now building in the department's lone holding cell. Agent Johnson had his men stacking the remains of what little resistance they had faced, including Jen, the young 20-year-old bride-to-be. The remaining police force of Shoshone Peak put up little resistance, and they all met with the same terrible fate. Pacing back and forth in front of the fully assembled six-man team, Agent Johnson reviewed his options. I believe our simple friend over there was able to warn the sheriff to stay away from this building, and I think it has worked. Now is the time that we need to put our best foot forward and discover the destination of the sheriff on our map. Excuse me. He continued to pace in silence for a few minutes before coming to a stop in front of the agents who pursued Sam and Emily. Folding his arms, he glared at the two men who now hung their heads in shame. But before we go on, I need to decide what to do with the two of you. In an act of sheer cowardice, the tattooed man fell to his knees and pleaded for mercy from Agent Johnson. Please, sir, we tried our best. Frank and I chased those little bastards all over the town. We had them until the police pulled up. I swear that next time, they will not get away. Agent Johnson leaned in and placed his arms around the large man's head, pulling him into his chest. I completely understand, Carl. It was a fluke event that could have happened to anyone, even me. As he consoled him, Agent Johnson removed a small knife from under his shirt sleeve and with a quick strike plunged it into Carl's cerebellum. Carl's body spasmed for a brief moment before going limp, the life draining out of him through the new hole in the base of his skull. Agent Johnson held on to Carl long enough to feel the last twitch of life leave him, and then he pushed the man's lifeless body to the tile floor. Turning to address Frank, he wiped his knife off on a Wyoming state flag hanging from a nearby wall. After he slid the knife back into the sheath he had strapped to his hip, he rested his hand on Frank's shoulder. Now, are you as much of a coward as poor Carl, or are you willing to accept the blame for this abysmal display of incompetence? Frank remained still, his expression stoic, even though he was now beginning to tremble with fear. There is no excuse for our actions. I take full responsibility for the mission's failure. Agent Johnson methodically addressed the large man standing before him, a sadistic smile growing across his face. Frank, you are an idiot, he said as he playfully slapped the man's face, but I applaud your humility. As Frank relaxed his body, Agent Johnson leaned in so that only Frank heard the next few words. But if you ever disappoint me again, I will not be as charitable. He released Frank and addressed the rest of his men. Now, before the young deputy over there passed on, he mentioned that the sheriff's truck was not loaded with a GPS transmitter, so tracking him will have to be done the old-fashioned way. Looking around the station, his eyes rested on the sheriff's office. Holger, I need you to search the sheriff's office for any sign of where they may be heading and who the sheriff trusts. Names, addresses, anything we can use. Holger snapped to attention. Yes, sir. He then turned and headed for the sheriff's office. Agent Johnson approached Frank, who was still shaking from his slim escape from death's clutches. Grabbing Frank by the chin, he pulled him within an inch of his face. Are you ready to redeem yourself, young man? Yes, sir, Frank replied, his voice shaking with fear. He released Frank and motioned for Anton to join them. I have chosen to believe poor Carl's assessment of the children's physical state, meaning that they will most certainly be seeking medical attention for the boy. I am sure that the sheriff is not careless enough to risk admitting them to the local hospital, but nonetheless, I want you both to stake out the town's hospital and search for any sign that may have been or are still there. Understand? We will not fail you, sir, Frank said with a renewed vigor. I'm sure you won't, Agent Johnson sneered, but stay extra sharp. Our fireworks display earlier has probably left the locals with a slew of wounded. The hospital might be full. Without another word, Anton and Frank both exited the station as fast as their feet could carry them, both now fearful of what the penalty would be if they failed. The two remaining men had remained stuck at attention, petrified by fear. The taller of the two was easily 6'7", and his skin was almost as black as the suit that draped over his lanky frame. What little hair that remained on his head was shaved into a tight fade, small traces of white peppered throughout. The second man stood no more than 5.5 feet, but his immense muscularity could be detected through his suit. He appeared to be Middle Eastern in descent, but there was a hint of African ancestry in his features. Agent Johnson approached the taller man. Tao, I need you and Amun to break into every hospital database within 200 miles of this location, and I need it done yesterday. Now, can you both handle this task, or do I need to motivate you as well? Tao stood straight up, his head barely missing the low-hanging ceiling fan above him. It will be a piece of cake, sir. The men stared at each other for a brief moment before Agent Johnson broke the uncomfortable silence. What do you need? An invitation? Go. Yes, sir, the men shouted before scurrying away like scared mice. Agent Johnson collapsed into the desk chair just behind him. Why am I surrounded by such unnerving incompetence? He playfully spun the chair a few times, stopping face to face with the picture of Sheriff Cole dressed like Elvis from the previous year's Halloween party. What do we have here? Studying the photo, he began to laugh. The king is dead. In a sudden motion, he punched his fist through the frame, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Re-energized by the thought of finishing this assignment and once again reaffirming his dominance over any who cross him, he stood and straightened his jacket. Long live the king, baby. That is the end of chapter 6. I hope you enjoyed it. Things are definitely starting to get exciting in the story. All right, we are on to chapter 7. 20 minutes had passed since Sheriff Cole's Bronco pulled up to the hospital in Rock Springs. Upon entering, he was able to admit Sam under a false name. He still didn't know who he could trust at this point. Sam and Emily had both sequestered in a private office near the back of the emergency room, where Dr. Jesse Schultz was now busy wrapping Sam's arm up in a sling. The sheriff had left them in Jesse's hands while he tried to gather any information he could about what happened in the town just an hour ago. Curiously, the rest of the world seemed ignorant of the events that had taken place. Crestfallen over his lack of answers, Sheriff Cole rejoined the group. So how are the patients, Doc? Dr. Schultz looked up from his work. The young lady has some minor cuts and bruises. Sam here has a little more of a productive day. He has a microfracture in his left clavicle and he's missing a piece of his right pinna. Pinna? That's what we like to call the top of the ear, Ethan, Jesse responded sarcastically. Sheriff Cole just rolled his eyes. He had grown up with Jesse back in Pahrump, Nevada, a small town just west of Las Vegas. Even though their dreams of dealing cards at Caesar's Palace would never come true, the two would remain close friends after high school. It was through a personal connection that Jesse had with Sheriff Cole's predecessor in Shoshone Peak that would eventually bring Ethan to Wyoming. Funny, Jess. Real damn funny. Sorry I never had a taste for Grey's Anatomy. Sheriff Cole walked over to Emily, who was sat next to Sam's bed. She was motionless. Her expressionless gaze focused on the multicolored tile floor. Sheriff Cole brushed back some loose, blood-stained strands of her hair. You all right, sweetheart? Emily sniffled, but remained still. Sheriff Cole just shook his head. He couldn't imagine what the children had gone through. Overcome by the emotions stemming from his own loss today, he didn't know how to express his feelings of immense sorrow and sympathy for the children's plight. Turning towards Sam, he playfully swatted at his sneakers. How you holding up, Sam? I don't know, sir, Sam answered. I just can't believe what's happening. Do you know anything about who did this? The sheriff sat at the foot of Sam's bed. I couldn't find anything on the news or the internet about what happened. It's very strange. Usually a town doesn't get attacked like this without someone noticing. And please, Sam, call me Ethan. Looking over to Jesse, the sheriff motioned towards the door. Can you give us a couple minutes, Jess? Sure, Ethan. I'll be right outside if you need me. As Jesse walked toward the door, Sheriff Cole called out to him. And remember, Jess, we're not here. Jess winked back at Ethan before he put his left index finger to his lips and walked out of the room. After Jess left the room, Ethan turned back towards the kids. Now I need you both to tell me, once again, exactly what happened today. Don't leave out any detail. Every piece of this puzzle is important. Sam shifted in his bed and began to tell the story from the beginning. After he had finished, there was a small whimper from Emily. Turning to her, Sam noticed the small tear running down her cheek. As he reached over to touch her, she pulled away in disgust. "Don't you touch me," she snapped and turned away from Sam. "This is your fault. I hate you." Sam slowly pulled back his hand. The guilt he felt was clear. "Now stop that," Ethan shouted at Emily. "This was not Sam's doing. The bad guys are out there, not in here." Emily kept her back to the men, her sobs muffled by her sleeve. After removing his hat and rubbing his head, Ethan turned back toward Sam. "I can't figure out why these men are after you, but it must have something to do with what you've got in your bag. Can I see it, please?" Sam reached over to the bag and removed both the box and the letter. He handed them cautiously over to Ethan. After spending some time looking over the box, Ethan placed it on the bed and focused on the letter. He read through it a couple times and put it down on top of the box. Sam looked on with curious excitement. "Well, what do you think?" "I haven't the foggiest. Maybe if we get into this box, we can figure something out." Sam sat up a little straight in his bed. "Should we call someone?" "Who do you think we should call?" "I don't know. Maybe the state police or FBI?" I think it would be best that we don't broadcast our whereabouts, at least until we figure out who is looking to hurt the both of you. These men just mowed through my entire police force with ease. Only well-trained folk could have done this, and men like that usually are connected through the nose. Reaching down and picking up the letter, Ethan studied the number written near the bottom. "Have either of you kids tried calling this number?" "No," Sam replied. "We didn't have a chance since all this started." Rubbing his chin, Ethan recognized something about the number. "I'm no expert, but this looks like a New York City area code." "Should we call it, Sheriff?" "Well, I don't think we have many options left. Do you?" Break. Outside Grand Central Station, New York City, 1:10 p.m. Joe Pagano sat next to his newspaper stand as he called that. Okay, I'm going to restart that. Joe Pagano sat next to the newspaper stand he had called home for the last 20 years. He had never been too crazy about this town or the trash he tried to sell to every commuter racing past him, but the Inquirer did help to pay the bills. At 57, he was too old to leave New York, especially when his beloved Yankees looked like they might actually put a decent pitching staff on the field this year. Joe had come to New York in the 90s, hoping to start a new life for himself. After chasing bad guys across the globe since he was a teenager, Joe felt that New York was the best place to disappear. He had spent the remaining few dollars he had left from his days with the CIA to buy this stand, and it had been his home ever since. It wasn't a bad life. Sure, the pay sucked, but he was able to flirt like a sailor with every attractive woman that walked by. And other than his tattered Yankees cap, Joe was still a looker. He stood just a hair over 6 foot, and he kept up his physique by lifting weights at the local rec center. He may have been on the downward slope to 60, but he didn't look a day over 35. Today had started like all the others. Joe had met the morning commuters with a smile and kind wave, receiving mostly scowls in return. Jason Schwartz was his best customer, and he had stopped at the same time he always did to buy this morning's copy of the Daily News. I told you I suck at this. He was a good kid. He worked at some big shot lawyer firm near Wall Street. Too bad he was a Mets fan. Joe always held that against him. After the morning crew had disappeared in a rush, Joe was left with nothing but his thoughts and a couple of stragglers. Fortunately, the silence wouldn't last long. Once the clock struck noon, the streets filled again, this time with hungry people looking for the best street vendors in the city. Joe was lucky enough to have Derek's Taco Heaven parked next to him every afternoon. Derek was always a big draw, and having that much foot traffic helped Joe sell some papers. After the lunch crowd scurried back to their buildings, Joe took up his spot next to the stand. He loved to feel the sun beat down on his face. It reminded him of his time in Baghdad. As the afternoon sun started to sink in the sky, Joe began the daily checklist that he followed before closing for the day. That's when he was interrupted by a sound that made his heart stop. A cell phone he had stashed in his bag began to ring. Now, this was no ordinary phone. This phone never rang before, and there was only one person in the world who knew the number. Jumping to his feet, Joe ran inside and lowered the wooden screen he used to secure the stand when he closed up shop. Now isolated from the world, Joe removed the phone and stared at the caller ID. Confused over the number on the screen, Joe answered the line. "Hello?" The other line was silent, but Joe could hear the soft breath from whoever had reached out to him. "Who may I ask is calling, and how did you get this number?" "I'd rather not say who I am, but I can tell you this number came from Simmons," a masculine voice uttered from the other side of the call. Upon hearing this, Joe froze in disbelief. This was a call he had hoped he would never come. "Are we speaking on a secured line?" "Not really. I'm calling from a hospital phone. I would assume it's not encrypted." "Is the package secured?" There was nothing but silence on the other end. "I repeat, is the package secured?" "We have the box." Taking a deep breath, Joe felt a momentary sense of relief. Reaching over to the bag, he removed the laptop and fired it up. After entering in a dozen security codes, Joe began furiously typing. "Now listen carefully. Have you been contacted by anyone pertaining to this package?" "I would say that. There were about a half dozen men that stormed through my town and left it in ruins." "Can you describe them?" "They look like feds, but I seriously doubt they were. I'm also not alone. There are 2 kids with me who were caught up in the mess as well." "What kid? Never mind. We need to get you 3 out of Wyoming." "How in the hell do you—" "Don't worry about how I know this. You need to leave now. These men are not to be trusted or underestimated. I would bet anything that they know where you are, and they will find you." "What should we do?" Joe looked at his watch. "You need to get out of there and find shelter until I can come and get you." "Why should I trust you? You could be one of them." "Trust me, if I wanted to harm you, I could have destroyed the hospital you're in with the push of a button." Jesus. "Now I need you to listen carefully." Joe brought up Wyoming's map on his laptop and reviewed the landscape. "You need to find a way out of there. I want you to find a phone somewhere, preferably a secured landline, and call me back for more instructions. I will expect your call within the hour, and remember, do not trust anyone." Joe slammed his phone shut, jamming the laptop and whatever money he had from the day's sales into his bag. Joe looked around the small newspaper stand with a bit of sadness. He knew this was the last he would ever see of it. Break. Ethan rehashed the entire conversation to Sam and Emily. Following a brief deliberation, the 3 decided to act on Joe's warning. Emily was the first to speak up with an idea for their escape. She thought they should devise their plan based off of a book she had read since she was little. She loved spy novels and remembered her hero Janice Lancer from the Dark Sunrise series being stuck in a similar situation. Janice was on assignment in Egypt when she found herself pinned down by Iranian terrorists. After some quick thinking, she used misdirection to open an avenue of escape. Using her satellite phone, Janice called in a bogus SOS to her agency, knowing her pursuers were monitoring her communications. When they followed her ghosts north towards Cairo, Janice slipped onto a train heading west. Since neither Sam nor Emily had thought of a better option, the 3 used Emily's idea as a blueprint in concocting their own escape plan. Just after arriving at the hospital, Ethan had spent a few minutes searching for escape routes, just in case they needed to make a quick exit. It was during his walk that he found the main dispatch area for the hospital's Mercy Flight helicopter. The station was unmanned at the time, and he took it upon himself to borrow the keys for the chopper. He had taken a few lessons back in '07, and it seemed like a good idea to have multiple options available. Their plan was to have Jesse leave the hospital in Ethan's truck as the group escaped in the chopper. Jesse knew this could end in not only his arrest and subsequent termination, but potentially his death as well. But he would do anything for the man he referred to as his brother. As Ethan poked his head out of the room to call for Jesse, he noticed a very tan, slender man in a black suit flirting with a lovely young woman behind the reception desk. The man had long salt and pepper hair pulled back into a ponytail, and he was flashing a fake smile along with an even faker FBI badge. Skeptical, Ethan paused at the door. To his terror, the man held up a picture of Ethan posing with Jesse and the 10-point buck they had taken down just last year. Ethan then knew exactly where the photo was in his office and the people who were there last to have access to it. Quickly, he turned to the kids. "Plans have changed. Go, now," he whispered as he pointed to the rear door connecting their room to the next ward. Without hesitation, Sam grabbed his bag, jammed the box, and let her back in and made for the door, followed closely by Emily and Ethan. Slamming through the door, they ran as fast as they could down the hall. Passing his side door out to the parking lot, Ethan motioned for them to stop and peered out the tiny window. Parked just past the handicapped access ramp was a large black SUV. The window was down, and a large, pale man with a long, blonde ponytail sat patiently. His eyes scanned the parking lot, a cigarette smoldering in his large hand. Ethan quickly pulled his head back and looked farther down the hall. About 50 feet from the roof from their spot was a service door with a sign over it that read Roof Access. There, go! Ethan prodded the group in a hushed tone. Following his direction, they made their way through the door and quickly ascended the stairs. When they reached the top, Ethan once again halted their movement and peered through a tiny window in the door. The roof seemed barren except for the hospital's medevac helicopter resting in the center. From behind, they heard shouting and rattle of machine gun fire. It seemed the agents were done with asking questions and had moved on to aggressive interrogations. Ethan looked down at the terrified kids. All right, you two, when I open the door, I want the both of you to make for the chopper and buckle yourselves in. Sam looked at Ethan in disbelief. Do you know how to fly one of those things? I used to. Just have to see how much I remember. Emily nervously grabbed onto Sam's right arm, squeezing tight. Now, Ethan shouted. Sam and Emily kicked open the door and ran full sprint towards the helicopter. To their relief, they made it without being shot at, and they dutifully went about securing themselves in. Ethan was not far behind. He had hung back long enough to jam a fire axe he had found into the door lock. Jumping behind the pilot stick, Ethan fired up the helicopter and strapped himself in. After checking on the kids, he began to lift off. Just as the landing skids had cleared the pad, a loud crack echoed over the rooftop. In a cloud of black smoke, the door to the roof exploded open and 3 men came rushing out. The first man through the door was a slender stranger Ethan had seen flirting at the reception desk. The next man was another agent in a black suit. This one had a blonde crew cut and a pretty nasty scar across his face. The blonde man was dragging someone behind him, and it was the sight of this person that caused Ethan to recoil in shock. Jesse was forced to his knees in front of the heavily armed captors. The momentum of his forward motion caused him to collapse into a crumbled mound. His coat was tattered and bloodstained, both of his eyes now swollen shut. Shaking off the fall, Jesse looked up at Ethan and just smiled. Go already, he yelled in one last defiant move. As the final syllable left Jesse's lips, gunfire from the blond man's machine gun ripped through his chest. No, Ethan painfully howled. Frank looked up from the fresh kill to the helicopter hovering above, smiled, and raised the weapon. There was a deafening rattle as the rifle roared to life. Ethan yanked back on the stick and gave all his effort to clear the roof. The large machine gun grunted against the sudden ascent, gunfire peppering the windshield and frame. Sam and Emily ducked down as best they could as glass and metal exploded all around them. With a desperate jab, Ethan was able to gain enough altitude to turn the old bird away from their attackers. As the chopper continued to climb, Ethan could not shake the image of the oldest and dearest friend being torn down. The eyes of Jesse's attacker kept flashing through his mind. These men were sadistic on a level he had never seen. It was as if they were amused by the execution. This realization caused Ethan to feel something he had felt in a very long time. Fear. Well, that was the end of chapter 6 and 7. And that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It is getting very exciting. Once again, I ask for your forgiveness when it comes to my flubs. It is actually more difficult to read on camera than I ever thought it was, especially in one take. But I do hope you're enjoying these because like I said before, I'm very proud of these books. And I am enjoying reading them. It's actually been a little while since I've read them last, so I am enjoying it quite a bit. I thank you, and I hope you have a good evening.